Hi, Alan Cox here. What is your requirement in your organization regarding lifecycle management for data? In other words, how long do you need to keep that email or that file inside of SharePoint or Teams or OneDrive? How long do you need to keep Teams conversations? These are some things that we should consider, both just from an overall compliance standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint. Well, today I'm going to talk about some things inside Microsoft Purview that can really help us narrow down the right approach to retention, depending on the use case, depending on what you're trying to do, ultimately, the types of files that we may be going after. So we're going to look at 3 different solutions inside Microsoft Purview, how to configure them, walk through them a little bit, and then give some use cases for each one. So that's going to be our topic today, so let's get started. All right, here we are in the Microsoft Purview portal, or the Purview Admin Center. So essentially, we get there by going to purview.microsoft.com. We can also get there by going to the Admin Center and going to Microsoft Purview. So there we go. So we're in Purview. Now, Purview is a whole suite of products. Purview is not just a product. Purview contains all of these solutions, right? We've got data security investigations, which is in preview. We've got information protection, loss prevention, insider risk, DSPM for AI, and bunch of solutions as we go here. Right, bunch of things here. The Purview is essentially the old Admin Center for Compliance Center. It's essentially the Compliance Center. Security Center has been rebranded to the Defender. Compliance Center has been rebranded to Purview. The Compliance E5 SKU is going to be rebranded to Purview Suite Premium, and so that is basically all the bells and whistles when it comes to Purview for the most part, or the Compliance Center. But in here we've got all these solutions, but we're going to focus here on this data lifecycle management, because we're talking about the lifecycle management of our data. Exchange. When does Exchange data expire, basically? When does an email expire and go to either retention, archive, something like that? What about SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams conversations? All of this stuff is we're able to manage its life cycle through a variety of methods. And we're going to focus on several different methods of retention. We've got retention labels, retention policies here, and then we've got this Exchange legacy retention we're going to talk about. Let's start there. So Exchange legacy is just that. It's only for Exchange data, and it is considered a legacy solution. It is not that it doesn't work today. It absolutely does. But Microsoft says we do not recommend using this option except for moving items from a primary to an archive mailbox and applying retention policies and settings to default folders. Well, what are default folders? Well, default folders inside of your Outlook is basically the inbox, sent items, what else? Recycle bin. You know, the default folders that every inbox is going to have, junk mail, all that kind of thing. So basically, the use case for MRM is still it's still valid, but it should only be used when you want to move things from a primary mailbox to Exchange Online archiving and have that archive mailbox where the user is enabled for archiving. You can only do that if they have E3 SKU or an E5 SKU in Exchange Online. So, but basically that's where you get that Exchange Online archiving, or you want different policies, different rules, or different retention for different folders within the mailbox. If that's not the case, then we may just look at a retention policy, and we'll take a look at that here in a minute. But let's take a look at these retention policies. So retention policies, and you start off with a default MRM policy. And basically, if we were to go to a user here, we can see that my account has this policy. Now it's basically being overwritten because it's got a different policy applied to it and all of that. But this is where we would apply this type of a policy if I needed to apply that policy. But essentially this policy is made up of tags. Now tags is really kind of what we're dictating happens with each folder. So for example, we'll just go in to look at these tags that are built in. These are default tags. If we were to create a new policy, we can determine what do we want each of these tags to do. So we're going to go in, and it's just easier just to go in and create a tag. So we're going to go create a tag. In this case, I'm going to do a 3-year inbox move to archive. I like to be a description in my names so that I can look at it and know right away what exactly that applies to and what's going to happen. So essentially, I'm telling it that this is going to be after 3 years. Once a qualifying email hits in 3 years, it's just going to move it to the archive inside of Exchange Online, right? So when we go next here, I can automatically apply that to the entire mailbox, which is the default. But to me, that sort of kind of defeats the purpose unless I just want everything to be 3 years across the entire mailbox and archive it. That's fine. But in this case, I specified in the title, in the name, and the description that I wanted it to be the inbox. I wanted to apply the inbox. Maybe I want something different. We'll look at it here in just a second. So I'm going to say inbox. Notice these default folders. Here are all your default folders. So I can apply a different rule, different retention level period to each inbox or each folder inside of my Outlook. And that's kind of the point of this MRM, which is why I like it. I do like it. So we're going to say when an item reaches the following ages in days. Now if I'm going to go 3 years, I can break out the handy dandy calculator. And so we're going to say 3 times 365, right, equals, so 1,095. I'm sure most of you figured that out pretty quick, 1,095. So I'm going to say 1,095, that's 3 years. I can say never delete and allow recovery. Permanently delete. So this is the retention action. But we're going to go next here. Actually, I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to say delete and allow recovery. Retention period, that is fine. So we're going to go next here and submit. Okay, so I've created that tag. Then we're going to go in, and maybe I'm doing another tag. Maybe I'm going to say sent. I'm going to say 90 days. And delete. I'm going to say 90 days deleted items, right? So basically 90 days deleted items, and the action is going to be delete. So we're going to say what folder, deleted items, next. Delete and allow recovery, that's fine. When it reaches, I said 90 days, that's 90 days, permanently delete. Delete and allow recovery basically allows us to get it from a recoverable items folder within 14 days by default. So we're going to say okay, we're going to go next, and that's it. Now, so that's all good. So now I want to create a policy, and I'm going to create this retention MRM. Well, I'm gonna say MRM for, we'll just say sales. Maybe it's gonna do sales, folks. And I'm gonna add tags to this policy. So I'm gonna say okay. So we do this 90 days here, and then we said 3-year inbox. So now I've applied each of these tags. So those tags are related to this particular policy. And if I were to say next, and submit. Okay, and then you would need to go in and essentially apply that tag or that policy to users here. So we can go in and manage this if we were using this. And I've done this in PowerShell and just send it on. So we'll just go here. Here's MRM for sales now. Of course, we can do this in bulk, and I'm going to save that if I were to save this. So that's basically it, and then that user will get those policies. It takes about 7 days for that to run. It just depends. It's based off of the Manage Folder Assistant, which runs every 7 days. Doesn't run from 7 days from that point. It could have run 2 minutes ago, in which case it would take 7 days. It could have run 6 days ago, in which case it would be running tomorrow, right? So it's 7 days from that time. You can figure out when that is in PowerShell and all of that when it runs. But basically, it can take up to 7 days for that to run. Now, if we want to create a different type of tag that is going to archive the mailbox, we have to apply that to the entire mailbox, and I'll show you how that runs. So we start with a tag. So we're going to create this tag, and I'm going to call this a three-year. We'll just say 3-year sales MBX archive. Okay, so I know how long it is, who it applies to, and what the action is, right? That's just generally how I do that. So we're going to say, okay, now I'm going to go next here. Now we have to automatically apply to the entire mailbox because we do not recommend using this option except when moving items to the primary. We didn't have an archive option when we were doing the default folder option here, right? When we were applying it to the different pieces of the mailbox, because for it to archive, it has to apply to the entire mailbox. So that's what we're going to do here, because now when we will next year, we'll see different options. So our time frame is still is 1095. I believe it's 3 years. But now we're going to say move to archive. Items will be moved to the user's archive mailbox. If the user does not have an archive mailbox, no action is taken. Okay, that's a good point because your users do need to have an archive enabled in Exchange Online. And where this is done is if we go to my account here, for example, go over here and go to Others, Manage Mailbox Archive, and this would then need to be turned on, and you can give this a name. I can say Alan Exchange Online archive, okay, or whatever I want to call it, and save it. And that will show up. It takes a little bit, but it will show up in my Outlook, kind of down below at the bottom, on the right hand or on the left hand side, like as if I'm connected to a shared mailbox. It'll look kind of like that. Then as mail qualifies and hits that archive period, it'll then build that folder structure out in that mailbox, right? So anyway, that's that. And so I'm going to say next, and then we just submit that. I'll go ahead and submit that. So we've just created the tag. That's all we've done. We've created the tag here. But now if I want to go in and create a retention policy that's going to apply that tag, then I can say sales 3-year archive, right? I'm going to add a tag. We go in and we add that tag, 3 years inbox, actually 3-year sales MBX. That was actually incorrect. I don't know why I called that move to archive. It should have just been retain or delete or whatever. But in any case, 3 years for this one. This is the one we just created. Default 1095 days. So we're going to add this, and that's really it. And at this point, it's just that's it. And so then we can go into tells you here we can go to the Exchange Admin Center. Once we have that, I can go into the Exchange Admin Center and I can apply this. Retention to the mailbox. Sales 3 years archive. Nope. Yep, sales 3 years archive. It will then start to again, that Manage Folder Assistant has to run, but it's going to take a little bit of time, and it will now start archiving my inbox. Okay, so that's the MRM policies. A little bit more we could, of course, talk about that. That's basically MRM policies. Again, use case, you want to move mail to an exchange. Online archive, only for exchange, only applies to exchange. Or finally, the other thing is if you want to apply different policies or different rule or different retentions, different different retention periods for different folders within the inbox or within the mailbox, sent items, deleted items, inbox, junk folder, those sort of things. You would use the retention policies that are under the MRM. Okay, so let's talk about retention policies now. So retention policies, and we don't have to worry about this, but this pay-as-you-go, you're going to see this popping up. This pay-as-you-go is related to AI policies, create new policies that include Copilot experiences, enterprise apps, and all of that. So it'll, you may see this popping up. We don't even have to worry about that. It's not really what we're dealing with here. But I'm just going to go in and just create a good old-fashioned retention policy. So this retention policy, we're going to click here, and I'm going to call this, I like to create policies that split out the workload. So for example, I don't have just an entire policy that has Exchange and SharePoint, Teams, and OneDrive. I break them out. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call this Exchange retention, and I may say, let's just do 7 years. Now, we could actually do, we're not going to get into adaptive, but you could do an adaptive here and say, let me try to think of what, executives. We'll just call it that for a minute, just because I'll show you that. But if we're doing this, we're going to go next. Now, we're not going to do administrative scopes. We're not managing certain sections of the policy or certain divisions or whatever, but maybe one of these days I'll do a little admin unit things there, but we're not worried about that now. I'm going to go ahead and do an adaptive scope, and I'm just going to show you that I like adaptive scope. If you want different policies to apply to different user groups based on certain things, dynamically, this is an E5 feature. So for example, executives, sales, IT, marketing, those kind of things. And there's other things we can do adaptive scope. I'll just show you what I mean. If I do static here, then I basically say, and I'm only doing exchange. Okay. We can do all of these, but I'm only doing exchange. I break this out, but it's going to include every mailbox unless I do exclusions, right? And so we go next here and we can do all of that. Now, if I do adaptive, I can do adaptive here and I can say, okay, let's see adaptive scope. I'm going to say executives. That's only going to apply to anybody that has, in this case, an executive that's a part of the executive's department, or executive department. And those are created inside of Purview. I'll just show you real quick. If you're going to Purview, I'll do a whole thing on adaptive scopes. But I go to settings here, and I go to roles and scopes and go to adaptive scopes. I can create sort of this dynamic department or this dynamic group almost, if you will. But I can create a scope. Let me just run through this real quick, and I'll show you what I mean. So don't have to do that. But the scope type could be users, SharePoint sites, or team or groups, 365 groups, right? So if I do users and I go next here, I can say what is the office, city. So I can force a policy based on adaptive or dynamic scope. You're in this city, you're in this state, this is your department, this is your job title. And of course I can do custom attributes as well. There are 15 of those, of course. So we can get into all that. If it's a SharePoint site, I can say this is only going to apply if the site is this or not this, right? So that's adaptive scopes. That's what we're talking about. So here I've actually created an adaptive scope called executive department. So now this doesn't really matter because it says now items in shared research doesn't apply to group mailboxes. But basically, it's because it's an adaptive scope, it's only going to apply, this retention policy is only going to apply to those in the executive's department, right? So now here's where we get into the retain items. So basically you have retained for 7 years when items were created or modified, and then we can delete items automatically or do nothing. We can retain items forever, or only retain items when they get a certain age. So this is kind of the opposite of that, right? So we're retaining items for a particular period of time. That means that if a user deletes an item within the 7 years, it doesn't actually go away. Okay? We can pull it through e-discovery, we can pull it through any number of ways. It doesn't actually go away. In this case, the items won't be retained, but when they reach a certain age you choose, we'll just delete them. So in other words, we're not guaranteeing they're going to stay here for 7 years, but when they do reach 7 years, they're going to go away, right? So, but this is guarantees the retention, right? So that's what we want to do. So 7-year retention, that's it. And I was telling you, items that are currently older than 7 years maybe will be permanently deleted after you turn on this policy. So that's it. So we click and we submit this policy. And that's pretty much that. Once you get to that point, you cannot edit the policy. You cannot edit the adaptive. It's locked in. Once you save it, you can't even change the title. So it's pretty much locked in right now. But the policy for retention, whether it's SharePoint, OneDrive, all of that is really not much different. You just select those workloads. But my recommendation is to not have a policy that incorporates multiple workloads. Do an Exchange policy, do a Teams policy, do a SharePoint policy, do a OneDrive policy. That's just my recommendation for me. So that is retention policies. Okay, pretty straightforward. Finally, I want to talk about retention labels. So retention labels allows us to be more granular at the item level. And here's how this works. Basically, if I'm going to go in and create a label, and I'm going to call this, let's say SIT retain 7 years. Okay, and so we're gonna do a user description, admin description. Basically, what this is going to be is anything that has an SIT of Social Security number, sensitivity information type, retain it for 7 years if it's a Social Security number on that. So we're going to say next, retain items for forever or for a specific period. Never do forever. Enforce actions, just label the items. We're going to retain items for 7 years from when the items were created. That's fine. We're going to go next. Delete items automatically. We can start a disposition review where we can have multiple stages of reviews where somebody has to validate before something gets deleted. If we want, we can do that. We can change the label. We can run a Power Automate flow or deactivate retention settings. All I'm going to do now is I'm going to just say delete the item. So anything that has a SIT or sensitive type, in this case of a Social Security number, is going to automatically be be retained for 7 years because the label's applied to them. We're going to show that here in a second. So that's it. So I'm just going to create the label. Again, just like any other label, the label itself doesn't do a whole lot. It's when it's applied, when it's published. So we can auto apply, which I do like to auto apply things rather than have someone apply the label to that product. In other words, I don't want the users to have to be trained to do it. I like them to do it automatically, or like it to be done automatically based on, in this case, sensitivity type. So we're going to auto apply this label, and I'm going to say done. Now it's going to generate this label policy. So I'm going to say SIN 7-year retention auto apply. Okay, just give it something that makes sense. And so we're going to say next here. Apply the label when the content that contains sensitive information. We can apply the label to content that contains certain keywords or phrases. We can apply this label to content that matches trainable classifiers. We won't talk about trainable classifiers just now. Or cloud attachments and links shared in Exchange, OneDrive, etc. Or Teams, Viva, Engage, and Copilot. I'm just going to apply that contains sensitive information. So I'm going to go here. Then now we're going to go, in this case, I'm going to go financial. I'm going to go United States of America. Actually, I'm just going to go enhanced. Nah, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go custom, next. And let's see, sensitive info type. I'm going to go SSN. Okay, Social Security number, because that's what we said. That's it. We're going to go next. No admin units. Adaptive, again, I can be adaptive and say, only apply if this, but in this case, I'm going to go static here. And I'm going to apply this. We didn't specify, but I'm going to say, you know what, if it's OneDrive, yeah, let me just look at this. Yeah, I'm going to say, OneDrive accounts, group accounts, items in a group mailbox, files in a corresponding group connected SharePoint team site. So basically, I'm going after files, not necessarily emails. I could, or I could create separate policies if I want. But the point is I'm deploying a label like I would label something for classification, for content, for sharing, and all of that. In this case, I'm applying a label for the purpose of retention. If you think about it like that. So I'm going to say next here. That's it. Choose a label to auto reply. That's it, because I started this with this. If I wanted to do a different label, I could. I'm not. So, and I can say next here. Turn on the policy, or I can test the policy before running it. We'll show you examples of the content that fits the policy's condition. No labels will be applied to content in your organization until you turn on the policy. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it in test mode for now so I get some reporting back on this. And there we go. So there are the 3 different types of retention that we can do inside of Microsoft Purview. We covered the MRM, and so I get this weird error because it creates it, but then I get the submit button, by the way, like it wants to do it again. But literally, if I go in, remember this is our name. If I go and I cancel this, it says, oh, are you sure you want to cancel? Yes. And then if I refresh here, it will show up. It's a bug, and so your mileage may vary. But we covered the legacy MRM retention policies. We also talked about just traditional old-fashioned retention policies, in which case, you want to apply at the container level. That's the use case there. The mailbox, a OneDrive account, etc., right? A SharePoint site, team site. That's where we can do these retention policies. Then you have retention labels. We can get into the type of content you want to label and how you want to label that based on sensitivity, based on any number of things. So that's it. Those are some of the different label policies that we have in some of their use cases. And yeah, that's it. If you have any questions, hit the comments below, and always make sure you like and subscribe, follow, and all of that good stuff. It just helps us out. But in any case, I'm so glad you got spend some time with us today, and I really appreciate you watching. Thanks.